My name is Terri Lawson. I am 52 years old and hold the rank of Lieutenant General in the United States Army. Over 3 decades in uniform, across deployments and commands, I have faced moments where silence carried as much danger as gunfire. Yet nothing in my career could have braced me for what unfolded at my father's memorial service. The church resonated with the deep vibration of the organ. The air hung thick with incense and sorrow. Rows of mourners in dark suits shifted restlessly. Some clutched folded tissues, others gripped each other's hands. My father's photograph rested on the altar, his uniform sharp within the frame, his medals glinting in the flicker of candlelight. He was a Marine to his core, a man who taught me that honor was never bestowed. It was something you stood guard over. I sat in the front pew, my husband Mark beside me. Mark is a 4-star admiral in the United States Navy and currently serves within the United States Special Operations Command. We had made a pact to keep the day solemn. No politics, no disputes, only remembrance of my father. Then I felt it, a small, deliberate motion beneath the pew. Mark's hand pressed a phone into mine, concealed from sight. I glanced down. A single message lit up the screen, plain and direct. Don't react. Your sister is recording you. My pulse steadied rather than quickened. Years of training had taught me that reaction is when an adversary spins. I let my gaze drift back toward the altar, my expression composed, my lips carrying the faint suggestion of a smile. I slid my thumb across the screen and entered a single word. Raven. That word was no accident. It was a code we had established, one designed to transform quiet observation into swift, decisive action. 10 seconds later, I heard the scrape of chair legs against hardwood. 8 individuals dressed as ordinary mourners rose from scattered positions throughout the sanctuary. No one present suspected they were Mark's SEAL team. Moving with unshakable precision, disguised as grieving guests, they split into pairs, scanned faces, and confiscated devices. No voices were raised. No one protested. The organ continued its solemn song as though nothing had shifted. In the periphery of my vision, I watched Rachel, my older sister, go rigid. The phone she had been angling toward me lowered slowly in her grip. Her mouth parted slightly, then closed. Her eyes moved from me to Mark and back, searching for understanding, perhaps for an escape. In that moment, I understood this reached beyond the present day. Something deeper was running beneath the surface, something that had been accumulating for years. Why would my sister seek to catch me unguarded in the midst of our father's memorial? Why transform a day of mourning into a stage performance? Those questions burned quietly as the SEAL team moved through the room, and I silently pledged right there in that pew that I would find every answer. Rachel attempted a smile as a SEAL in a black suit accepted her phone with a courteous nod. She adjusted her scarf, leaned toward the woman beside her, and murmured something I could not make out. She carried the look of someone trying to appear as though she had not just been caught. I had seen that expression before. In my 20s, shortly after my commissioning, she had spread the story that I joined the Army because I lacked the temperament for civilian life. At family gatherings, she would lift her glass and say things like, "To Terry, Dad's favorite," wearing that half smile that sounded like praise but landed like a jab. My father used to tell me, not every traitor stands on the other side of the battlefield. I had once believed he was speaking of politics or foreign enemies. I had not yet understood that loyalty could fracture within the bloodline without crossing an ocean. Now, watching Rachel tilt her head toward the altar, I could sense the architecture of her intentions even without hearing a single word. This was not merely sibling rivalry. It was something deliberate, something she believed she could conceal within the folds of grief. Mark did not look my way. He kept his gaze forward, his hands folded. That was precisely how I knew the situation extended beyond a petty stunt. If he had quietly activated the SEAL team, it meant he already possessed pieces of the picture I had not yet seen. As the pastor began to speak, I kept my breathing measured and my posture unbroken. In the Army, you come to understand that battle rarely originates where the first bullets fly. It begins in those moments when you're tested to remain still while every instinct commands movement. 3 days before the memorial, I had been in my father's study. The room carried the scent of cedar and aged paper. I was sorting through his personal belongings when I discovered a crumpled paper bag at the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay his Purple Heart, the one he had earned in Vietnam. I held it in my open palm. I was 10 years old the day he first placed it there, saying, "This is not for the wound. It is for the choice to keep going." That memory struck me with a force I had not anticipated. Later that evening, Mark entered the kitchen wearing the expression that signals difficult news. He had received intelligence from a source within Rachel's circle. She had arranged for people to attend the memorial with a single purpose: to film me reacting. If I wept too openly, displayed anger, or confronted her, those clips would be edited and shaped into a portrait of instability. She intended to use the footage to contest my share of our father's estate and, more gravely, to derail my pending nomination to the National Security Council. It was not merely about inheritance. It was about dismantling everything I had spent my life constructing. That was when we settled on the code word. That was when we resolved that if Rachel wanted a performance, she would receive one, only not the one she had scripted. Following the memorial, Mark and I did not speak about what had occurred until we were home behind locked doors. Both of us had learned through our respective careers that timing was everything. Sometimes the silence immediately following an event was the most effective way to protect the truth from too many ears. In the living room, he handed me a folder. Inside were still photographs, phone numbers, and brief notes scrawled in his handwriting. These were not assembled randomly, each connected to someone who had attended the service, each marked with a discrete symbol indicating their potential threat level. Mark had tapped the intelligence channels accessible to him through his role at SOCOM. It was not a favor requested without weight. His team had quietly traced threads through Rachel's phone records and financial transactions, and the picture sharpened with each new connection. The names meant little to me initially, but one brought me to a halt. Colonel David Mercier. The last occasion I had seen Mercer was 5 years prior, across a conference table at Fort Bragg. He had been assigned to a joint special projects unit I was overseeing. Brilliant on paper, reckless in execution. He had disregarded operational protocols in ways that could have cost lives. I removed him from the assignment and ensured the record reflected the reasons. It had been among the most unpopular decisions of my career, yet it had been necessary. Now his name appeared in a file linked to my sister, not as a distant acquaintance, but as a business partner in a consultancy Rachel had established 2 years earlier. I set the folder down and drew a slow breath. In the Army, we are trained to see the battlefield not merely as it exists, but as it will become. I could already discern the shape of this one forming. Rachel had not simply hired strangers to film me. She had aligned herself with someone who carried a motive to see me discredited, someone who understood how to play a long game and wield perception as a weapon. Mark studied my expression. "I know you want to confront her," he said, "but that is exactly what they are expecting." He was right. The impulse toward direct confrontation was powerful. Military service drills decisive action into a person. But this was not a mission with a defined theater and clear objectives. This was personal warfare, which rendered it far more treacherous. Every action I took would be scrutinized. Every reaction would potentially feed the narrative they were assembling. I told them I wanted more than names. I wanted patterns. People leave trails when they believe themselves clever. Meetings at recurring locations. Payments routed through layered accounts. Conversations that appear casual until the context is revealed. Over the following week, Mark's contacts supplied pieces. One placed Mercer and Rachel together in a corner booth at a restaurant near the courthouse. Another traced a payment from Rachel's account to a shell company, then onward to a private investigator who specialized in emotional surveillance. I kept everything organized in a binder on my desk, each page a map of their miscalculations. I refused to allow anger to lead. Anger generated noise, and noise produced mistakes. My father used to tell me that battles were not won by shouting across the field. You won by ensuring the opposing side never saw you coming. At night, I would work through the binder, tracing lines between names, places, and dates. Every connection was another knot in the net I would eventually draw, closed around them. Each time I encountered Mercer's name, I reminded myself that revenge was not the objective. The goal was to ensure they could never again threaten my career, my family, or my father's honor. The pieces were assembling themselves. All that remained was patience and the conviction that in the end, the truth would not merely surface. It would stand so plainly in the open that even Rachel would be forced to confront it. 2 days after the memorial, I drove to Rachel's house with a casserole. It was the kind of gesture my father would have insisted upon. I rang the bell and squared my shoulders. I had no intention of arguing. The visit would be brief and watchful. Rachel was not home. Her daughter, Lily, answered the door with a bright smile. She was 9 years old and earnest. The babysitter called from the kitchen that Rachel had stepped out, waving me in before returning to a sink full of dishes. Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Aunt Terri, come see what I made." She led me to the dining table where paper crowns lay in a row. One was purple with silver stars. Purple has always brought my father to mind. I placed it on her head. "Regal," I said. She laughed and spun in place. We colored together in quiet. Lily drew a medal resembling an oval with a ribbon, shading it purple. "Is this Grandpa's heart medal?" she asked. "The one for being brave and hurt at the same time?" "Yes," I said. "It is called a Purple Heart." She nodded, then tilted her head in the way children do when they carry words too heavy for them. "Mom says you're going to sell all of Grandpa's medals." She said it the way a child might ask about dessert after dinner. Heat rose in my chest. Not rage, but something heavier. I set down the marker. The room snapped into sharp focus. The refrigerator's hum, the clink of a spoon, Lily's small breath waiting for my reply. Weaponized innocence does not arrive with warning sirens. It arrives with wide eyes and open questions. I crouched so we were level with each other. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone even, "medals are not things I sell. They're things I protect. Your grandpa gave his country more than most people will ever comprehend. Those medals belong to the story of who he was." She frowned. "Then why would Mom say that?" "Sometimes grown-ups speak from a place of hurt," I said. "Sometimes they are mistaken." I did not add that sometimes grown-ups use children to deliver wounds that leave deeper scars. Lily traced the purple medal with her fingertip. "Can you show me the real one sometime?" "Yes," I said. "I can show you and explain how he earned it." The babysitter announced that Rachel had texted and would be home in 10 minutes. I helped Lily glue a ribbon to the paper medal. It felt like a promise. When I left, I did not slam the door or call Mark. I placed the empty dish on the passenger seat and sat with my hands resting on the wheel. The insult had been precise. It did not merely bruise my pride. It struck at my father's honor. I could taste metal at the back of my throat. On the drive home, I contacted an archivist at the Army Heritage and Education Center. I arranged temporary custody paperwork so the medals could be cataloged, photographed, and stored in a climate-controlled vault. If Rachel intended the narrative to be that I would sell them, the record would say otherwise. Facts are steadier than rumors. They endure. Back at my desk, I opened the binder and drew a line connecting Rachel's name to Mercer's. I added a note in red ink, leverage through the child. Narrative contamination. I breathe in for 4 counts and out for 6. I would not allow them to conscript Lily into their war. I would not permit them to transform a child into a weapon against her own history. Ever. The family gathering was held in my uncle's house under the guise of discussing memorial donations. The living room carried the scent of coffee and furniture polish, the kind of fragrance that should have suggested comfort. Instead, it felt like a stage dressed for something else entirely. Rachel sat across from me, legs crossed, a porcelain cup balanced in one hand. She waited until the room fell quiet, until all eyes could swing in her direction, then smiled. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with joy. "You know," she said lightly, "Terri has always been exceptional at directing soldiers, but out here in real life outside the Army, I'm not certain she'd know what to do with herself." It was a simple sentence dressed as a joke, yet I felt the shift in the air. A few cousins chuckled uneasily. My aunt lowered her gaze to her lap. The words were intended to settle and take root, to plant a seed in the minds of everyone present. I set my coffee down without a sound. My posture did not waver. but I let my gaze find Mark's from across the room. His jaw tightened just enough for me to register it. And in that silent exchange, we both understood. This was not an isolated remark. This was an opening volley in something considerably larger. I could have responded. Years of command had equipped me with the precision to cut through subtext cleanly. But battles chosen in anger are seldom won through strategy. Instead, I let the silence do its work. People remember who stayed composed when provoked. They also remember who threw the first stone. Rachel turned toward another relative as though the remark had already been forgotten, but I caught the swift glance she directed at me from the corner of her eye. She was checking for damage. I gave her none. The gathering moved on to donation logistics, figures, and accounts, but my attention had moved elsewhere. In my mind, I added another line to the binder at home. Public undermining attempt. Witness count 12. Mark's gaze remained steady on me throughout. No words passed between us on the drive home. None were needed. The war had already commenced. It simply had not yet been announced. The day following the family meeting, Mark slid an unmarked envelope across the kitchen counter. He said nothing until I had broken the seal and withdrawn a small flash drive. This came in last night, he said. One of the seals embedded at the memorial retrieved it without drawing any attention. I had it decrypted before breakfast. I walked to my study, shut the door, and inserted the drive into my laptop. The file list was brief. One audio file, timestamped 2 hours before the memorial service began. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I pressed play. The sound was muffled at first. The clink of silverware, low voices in the background, the ambient noise of a hotel lounge. Then a voice I recognized more intimately than my own rose above the rest. Rachel's. Just get the moment, she was saying, her tone flat and businesslike. I don't care whether she's crying or snapping at someone. Just get the moment she loses control. A pause followed, then the faint sound of money sliding across a surface. A male voice, unfamiliar to me, responded. Understood. One clean shot is all it takes. Rachel's voice returned, sharper this time. Exactly. People don't remember the complete story. They remember the image you hand them. I want them to see her as unstable. The rest will take care of itself. I stopped the playback and leaned back in my chair. The air in the room felt denser, as though the walls had contracted. I replayed the clip with my eyes closed, wanting every inflection burned into memory, every pause mapped. The SEAL who had captured it had been seated diagonally behind them, his phone's camera lens concealed as a shirt button, a directional microphone sewn into his cuff. The quality was pristine. The conversation was damning. Mark had been right. This was not improvised malice. Rachel had planned the operation carefully enough to hire someone with surveillance expertise. It extended beyond the memorial or the estate. This was about constructing a narrative she could deploy in every circle we shared: family, professional, and public. I drew out my binder and created a new tab, Direct Transactions. I printed the transcript, noting the timestamp, location, and voice identifications. Every detail would matter later, not only in court, but in the court of public opinion. Still, part of me hesitated. Hearing her voice stripped away the thin hope I had been holding, the possibility that this was a misunderstanding, that grief had temporarily distorted her judgment. No, this had been calculated and deliberate. She had selected her weapon, and it was me. I forwarded a secure copy of the file to our attorney with the subject line, Category A Evidence, Immediate Review. Then I encrypted the original, stored it in a separate cloud account Rachel could never access, and physically secured the drive in my safe. While I returned to the kitchen, Mark was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. She's not just playing dirty, I said. She's trying to rewrite who I am. He nodded once. Then we'll ensure her version never makes it past her lips. That night, I listened to the recording once more alone. Not out of necessity, but as a reminder. In my profession, intelligence gathering is not solely about identifying the enemy. It is about understanding their intent. Rachel had given me that freely, and I intended to use it until every last word turned back against her. After securing the audio file in the safe, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the binder without turning a single page. My thoughts drifted not to the evidence itself, but to where all of this had originated. The roots of betrayal rarely emerge overnight. They require years, even decades, to anchor themselves. I was 21 this summer. I informed my father I intended to enlist in the Army. We were in the backyard beneath the shade of the maple tree he had planted the day Rachel was born. He was cleaning his old service rifle, his hands steady despite the arthritis already working its way into his knuckles. Rachel came outside, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She placed them on the patio table and seated herself across from him. "Tell her she's making a mistake," she said without glancing at me. My father did not reply immediately. He kept his focus on the barrel, running the claw through with the precision of long habit. Finally, he looked at her. "Your sister has made up her mind." Rachel folded her arms. "She doesn't know what she's walking into. It's not like school or a summer job. This changes everything. It's dangerous. She trailed off as though the word she wanted was too sharp to release. I opened my mouth, but my father raised his hand, palm toward me. A silent request to allow him to handle it. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you are strong. You have always been. But your sister possesses an iron will, and sometimes that is what is needed more than anything else." The compliment settled on me like a badge, but I did not miss the way Rachel's expression shifted. It was not mere disagreement. Something cooler moved across her features, a flicker in her eyes I could not name at the time. She pushed back her chair with a scrape. "Fine," she said, rising, "but don't come to me when everything falls apart." She walked inside and let the screen door slam behind her. My father sighed and returned to the rifle. "You cannot expect everyone to understand why you choose the path you do," he said, "but you must be prepared to carry the weight that comes with it." At the time, I believed he meant the weight of command, of deployments, of a uniform itself. Only years later did I understand he had been warning me of a different kind of burden, the strain that achievement places on relationships, particularly when one person feels left behind. That day beneath the maple tree, my father had given me his blessing. But in doing so, without intention, he had planted something in Rachel. Not malice, not yet, but comparison. And comparison, left unchecked, hardens into resentment. Sitting at my desk now, decades later, I could trace the line clearly. Every jab, every rumor, every carefully positioned word meant to undermine me, all of it traced back to moments like that one. My father's praise had been genuine, but it had fractured something between us that never fully healed. The irony was bitter. He had told me I possessed an iron will. What he had not said was that one day I would need every ounce of it, not to face a battlefield abroad, but to survive the one waiting for me at home. 2 evenings after hearing Rachel's recorded arrangement, I received an unexpected call. The number was unknown to me, but the voice on the other end was immediately familiar. "Terry, it's Dana Whitfield. We attended high school together, and I've kept in touch with Rachel over the years." Her tone carried hesitation, as though she was weighing each word carefully. She asked whether we could meet in person. We agreed on a small coffee shop off the main road, quiet enough for privacy and public enough to feel neutral. When I arrived, Dana was already there, stirring a cup she had not touched. She looked up and offered a tentative smile. "I'm not certain I should be here," she began, "but I believe you need to understand something about your sister." I said nothing, letting her find her rhythm. "She always admired you," Dana said. "When you gained admission to West Point, she told everyone how proud she was. But things shifted, especially after your father's was made known. I think she felt invisible, as though you were the only one he truly saw." The words settled between us. It was not news to me that the estate had been divided unequally. My portion was larger, tied to the responsibility of maintaining my father's military memorabilia and property. It had been his decision, communicated to both of us before his passing. I had assumed Rachel had found a way to accept it, even if reluctantly. Clearly, I had been wrong. Dana leaned forward and lowered her voice. "It isn't simply the money. She told me once that when your father entrusted you with the Purple Heart to safeguard, she understood he was giving you parts of himself he had never offered her. She was never able to move past that. I felt the weight of my binder in my mind, each page of evidence, each calculated move made against me. Those were acts of strategy. But beneath them lay something far more personal. A wound she had been carrying long before the memorial. Long before Mercer. Long before she had ever thought to hire someone to catch me off guard. Dana glanced toward the door as though afraid Rachel might enter. "I'm not defending what she is doing," she said. "But I think you should know it's not purely about bringing you down. It's about her trying to fill a space she is convinced she will never possess." I thanked her and paid for her coffee before she could object. On the drive home, city lights blurred across the windshield. This was not merely about money or professional sabotage. It was about a fracture that had existed since we were young. A division my father never intended, but had never fully recognized. That did not excuse her actions, but it reframed the battlefield entirely. I was no longer simply confronting an enemy. I was navigating the consequences of a lifetime of comparison. And that made the path forward both clearer and considerably more complicated. The moment the SEAL team rose from their seats in the chapel, the atmosphere changed. It was not loud. No commands were barked, no voices raised. But the shift in presence was unmistakable. Faces that had blended into the grief-filled congregation now moved with a purpose no civilian could quite identify. Rachel froze mid-swipe on her phone, her eyes darting to the men and women who were no longer simply mourners. Their movements were precise, almost reverent as they fanned out, each taking responsibility for a different section of the chapel. Not a single camera flash went off. Not a single gasp broke the stillness. Only the sound of polished shoes against the wooden floor and the faint creak of pews as they passed. I kept my gaze fixed on my father's framed photograph at the altar. The black and white portrait showed him in uniform, jaw set, eyes directed forward, as though even in death he was still standing watch over the room. My phone, still in my lap, was warm from the single word I had sent. Raven. I had no need to look at Mark. I could feel him a few rows back, the calm center of a storm he had choreographed weeks in advance. 2 weeks before the memorial, in the quiet of our kitchen, he had laid out the plan. "She'll try something," he said, filling my mug with coffee. "And if she does, we need to ensure she is the one exposed, not you." I bristled at first. "Mark, this is my father's memorial. It is supposed to be about him. It will be..." He interrupted, his tone measured. "But you need to recognize that Rachel will not respect the sanctity of the moment. She will see it as an opportunity. We take that from her." He showed me a diagram. Rows of seating, shaded zones marking angles of visibility, notes on positioning. Every member of the SEAL team would attend in civilian clothing, blending in as friends of friends, distant relatives, or even members of the clergy. Their purpose was not to intimidate. It was to quietly neutralize any effort to record, manipulate, or distort what occurred that day. I examined the plan and asked, "And if she does nothing?" Mark had met my eyes. "Then they sit there and mourn your father alongside everyone else. No one ever knows." That was the thing about Mark. His operations were never simply about force. They were about precision, about accounting for every possible outcome without drawing unnecessary attention. In his world, the most effective interventions often occurred without a single shot fired. Back in the chapel, I watched as one SEAL gently approached the guest seated next to Rachel, an older man I did not recognize, and extended a hand. The man, visibly confused, surrendered a small recording device without resistance. Another team member moved along the side aisle, leaning toward someone in the third pew. A phone was handed over almost immediately. All of it was conducted with the same composed courtesy Mark had emphasized. No accusations, no confrontations, simply a quiet and methodical removal of weapons, though here the weapons were digital. Rachel's phone was the last to be taken. She resisted, a tight smile fixed on her face as she attempted to keep the device close. But the woman who approached her, a SEAL with short blonde hair and a black blazer, was unwavering in her composure. She whispered something I could not hear, and Rachel's hand slowly opened. From my seat, I caught Rachel's eyes. They were wide and searching, her mouth slightly parted. For a fraction of a second, I thought I detected the flicker of a memory, perhaps of another moment she had been outmaneuvered, perhaps of the maple tree conversation with our father years ago. I offered her no more than a glance. My attention returned to the altar, to the folded flag resting at its center. The mission was underway, and for now, my role was straightforward: to sit still, say nothing, and allow the silence to work. The chapel had barely settled when the murmurs began. At first, they were whispers, a ripple of confusion at the sight of strangers collecting devices, subtle shifts in posture as people attempted to piece together what had just occurred. But then the whispers sharpened into voices, and those voices carried across the room. An older cousin, one I had not seen in years, rose from the back row, his face flushed with indignation. "Terri, what on earth was that?" His voice cracked through the quiet like a board splitting. "This is your father's memorial, not some military operation." Others joined, though more softly, their words layered with reproach. "Disrespectful, completely unnecessary. She's turned this into a spectacle." I remained seated, back straight, eyes still on the photograph at the altar. I let their words move over me like rain against glass, present but not penetrating. At last, I turned my head and met my cousin's glare with a measured composure I had been trained to employ. "It was not I who made a scene," I said, my voice even, every syllable distinct. "It was the truth, and the truth required no embellishment." The sentence hung, suspended in the air. A woman in the third row, my aunt and Rachel's godmother, shifted in her seat. "Terri, you could have addressed this at another time," she said gently, though her eyes carried the weight of judgment. "Your father would have wanted peace today." Peace. That word pressed against me like a cold hand. My father had spent his life serving a nation where peace was often a fragile illusion, earned and maintained through the quiet work of people who received no recognition. He had taught me that peace was not the absence of conflict. It was what you achieved by addressing conflict before it could spread. I drew a slow breath. "My father wanted the truth honored," I replied. "And if that meant revealing what was being conducted here in his name, then today is precisely the right occasion." The reaction divided the room. Some nodded, their expressions firming with understanding. Others shook their heads, lips pressed thin, unwilling to accept that the sanctity of the service had already been compromised long before the SEAL team moved. Rachel sat motionless, hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes locked on me. She did not speak, not yet, but I could feel the heat of her anger from across the aisle, could almost hear the silent accusations assembling in her mind. From the corner of my vision, I caught Mark. He remained in his seat, steady as stone, his gaze shifting between me and the growing pockets of discontent. He understood, as I did, that once a truth is revealed, people respond in one of two ways. They either cling to the comfort of prior belief, or they step into the discomfort of seeing things as they actually are. Neither response is wrong, but both carry consequences. I faced forward again, my focus returning to the folded flag at the altar. My father had carried that flag through 2 combat zones and brought it home untouched. Today, it felt heavier than any weapon I had ever held. The murmurs did not subside. If anything, they deepened, forming 2 distinct undercurrents in the room, one of quiet support, the other of simmering disapproval. And as I sat there, hands folded, posture unshaken, I recognized that this was not merely one battle in a family dispute. This was the opening passage of a war that had been building for years. Today, the front line had moved into full view. Rachel rose slowly, smoothing the skirt of her black dress as though the fabric itself were the only thing worth attending to. The room fell silent, watching as if anticipating an apology or at minimum a parting remark. But she said nothing. She walked toward the aisle, her heels clicking against the polished wooden floor with measured deliberateness, as though every step were part of a performance she knew the audience would carry home. When she passed me, she did not look away. Her eyes locked with mine, holding long enough for the message to transmit clearly. Not fear, not shame, challenge. It was not the sort of challenge that dissolves with words. It was the kind that must be answered one way or another. I held my expression still and my breathing even the way I had trained in interrogation environments when someone was working to provoke an error. Mark did not stir beside me, but I felt the subtle adjustment in his posture, as though he had just marked the moment in his mental record of this campaign. Rachel reached the chapel doors, opened them without looking back, and stepped into the cold afternoon light. There was no dramatic exit, no emphatic slam, only the quiet click of the door settling back into its frame. But that sound carried more weight than any shouted threat. It was her declaration, "I am not finished." The service continued, though the atmosphere in the room had transformed. Conversations afterward were clipped and polished, as though everyone understood they were standing in the center of something far larger than a family disagreement. I shook hands, accepted condolences, and thanked people for attending, all while Rachel's look remained imprinted behind my eyes. It was the expression of someone who had just conceded a battle but was convinced she could still win the war. When Mark and I finally stepped outside, winter air bit at my skin. But it was not the cold that produced the shiver. It was the certainty, etched as clearly as her stare, that Rachel's next move would be calculated, personal, and arriving soon. And I would be ready. It began with a single name. The former Army officer I had flagged from Mark's intelligence report, someone I had removed from a joint operation years earlier for falsifying readiness logs, now appeared on Rachel's contact list. That alone was suspicious, but what arrested my attention was the company he now kept. Mark's team had traced a sequence of encrypted messages from him to a law firm in Arlington. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard mid-tier practice, the kind found in any downtown building with beige walls and polite receptionists. But the deeper we investigated, the more a different picture emerged. These attorneys were not simply courtroom figures. They operated in archives, human resources offices, and digital record systems. Their specialization was not defending clients. It was dismantling people. They had built careers on seeding doubt about the credibility of political rivals, corporate executives, and military officers. The pattern was invariably the same. First, they would locate something small but true, an offhand remark, a minor procedural lapse. Then they would magnify it, wrap it in manufactured context, and feed it to the right parties until the damage was permanent. When nothing genuine could be found, they would quietly manufacture it. Altered documents, anonymous complaints, whispered tips to journalists. And now they were working with my sister. The connection clicked. The recording operation at my father's memorial had not been impulsive. It was an opening move. The true objective was considerably larger. If they could obtain footage of me losing composure in public, they could characterize it as instability, route it to the appropriate channels, and allow the rumor current to erode my standing in the Army. That would do more than wound my career. It would strip my security clearance, dismantle years of operational trust, and render me radioactive to every future assignment. Rachel was not simply trying to embarrass me. She was trying to erase me. I sat at the dining table that night with the file spread open before me, names, timelines, and connections drawn in ink. Mark stood at the counter, arms folded, watching me work through it. "They have been doing this for a considerable time," I said at last. "And they are skilled at it," he replied, "which means we cannot simply react. We have to control the timing." I thought of my father's words from years past. Not every enemy wears a uniform. Studying the web of connections before me, I understood that this was no longer just Rachel's fight. She had attached herself to something that had undone far more formidable people than me. What she had failed to understand was that I had spent my career operating in the shadows, learning how networks unravel when you locate the right thread. The difficulty was that the right thread might also be family. 3 days after Mark traced the law firm's connections, the strike landed. I was partway through reviewing a readiness report when my phone buzzed. 3 rapid notifications from separate contacts. Each had sent the same thing, a link to a video that had gone viral. My stomach tightened before I had even opened it. The clip ran only 15 seconds. It showed me in a dimly lit room holding my father's Purple Heart. My expression was unreadable, then a hard cut to me tossing something into a trash bin. The camera angle shifted just enough to capture the sound of metal striking the can's rim. The audio was muffled, but layered over it came my voice, clear enough to be persuasive. "It's just a piece of metal." I went still. I understood exactly what they had done. The first portion was from a year prior, when I had been cataloging my father's military memorabilia for safekeeping. I had been holding the metal above a storage box, not a trash can. The second portion, showing me discarding something, was from an unrelated charity cleanup where I had thrown away a dented lamp. They had stitched the two together, cleaned the audio, and inserted words I had never spoken. By the time I reached the end of the clip, the view count was already climbing. 20,000, then 22. The hashtags told me everything about how it was spreading. Her disrespect, stolen valor, family loss, and disgrace. I called Mark. He had already seen it. "It's staged," I said, keeping my voice level. "Of course it is," he replied. "But that is not the point. The point is they have chosen the battlefield." And they had. The comments section had become a war zone. Some called for my resignation. Others defended me, insisting it was a smear. Former acquaintances weighed in, some supportive, others with poorly concealed judgment. My inbox filled with journalists seeking statements, military blogs publishing pieces about the erosion of honor and leadership. The pace of it was not organic. Mark's cyber team confirmed the clip had been seeded by accounts connected to the same Arlington law firm. The network was amplifying it with automated traffic to force it to trend. I sat back reading the comments, my pulse steady but my jaw taut. This was not only an attack on me, it was an assault on my father's memory. They had weaponized not only his metal, but the values it embodied. For a moment, the temptation to respond publicly burned in my chest. One clear statement, and I could dismantle the lie. But then I recalled that these people were not seeking truth. They were seeking spectacle. If I reacted then, they would have precisely what they wanted. So instead, I closed the video. I drew a breath, and I began planning what would come next, because if they want a battlefield, I would ensure it was one of my choosing. That night, I stopped reading comments and opened the binder instead. If they wanted theater, I would select the stage and control the lighting. I called our attorney, then Mark. We settled on a single objective: reveal the complete chain of manipulation in one controlled setting, with independent witnesses and documented evidence. The ideal venue presented itself. The County Veterans Hall was hosting a public ceremony to dedicate a new display honoring local service members. My father's name was already engraved on the bronze plate. The organizers had invited me to say a few words. I had considered declining after the smear video. Now was precisely where I needed to stand. I structured the presentation like an operational order. Phase 1, authenticate. I arranged for the Army Heritage and Education Center to deliver certified photographs of every medal and citation, including archival scans of my father's service records. A museum registrar agreed to attend with custody receipts. Her testimony would corroborate the chain of care. Phase 2, expose. Mark's team prepared the original footage from the cataloging day and the charity cleanup. Frame-by-frame comparisons would reveal the cut points and mismatched metadata. An audio spectrogram would show the spliced phrases. The hotel lounge security time code would anchor the payment. File hashes would confirm integrity for anyone inclined to verify. Phase 3, protect. Our attorney filed preservation notices and sought a temporary injunction to halt further distribution of the fabricated clip. I rehearsed the address in my kitchen, not for dramatic effect, but for clarity. I would not lead with accusations. I would honor my father, establish the facts, then allow the audience to observe the contrast on screen. Words would be minimal. The evidence would carry the argument. I printed handouts with QR codes linking to notarized files so that anyone could verify them independently. Mark managed security discreetly. No uniforms, no shows of force, only quiet eyes in the crowd prepared to remove anyone who attempted disruption. The objective was not humiliation. It was daylight. A retired judge agreed to sit in the front row as a neutral observer. 2 local journalists would attend without cameras. Their notebooks would be sufficient. The evening before the event, Dana texted, "Rachel knows something is approaching. She appears both terrified and furious." I thanked her. Then I wrote a final note on a yellow card I intended to keep in my pocket. It carried my father's sentence: Not every traitor stands on the other side of the battlefield. I slid the card behind the program. It steadied my hands. At dawn, I drove to the hall with the binder on the passenger seat. The Purple Heart was already secured in the museum case. I touched the glass with my fingertips. The metal caught the light. It seemed almost to breathe. Whatever occurred on that stage, my father's honor would not be a prop. It would be the standard I raised. I was ready to return fire, not with anger, but with precision and publicly. The Veterans Hall event was scheduled for the weekend, but the law moved first. Thursday morning, I entered the county courthouse with my attorney, Ms. Hayes. We sat at the petitioner's table. Across the aisle, Rachel adjusted a silk scarf and avoided my gaze. The judge entered. The clerk called our case. Hayes rose and opened with the chain of custody. She placed a sealed evidence bag on the table, then projected a timeline onto the courtroom screen. Exhibit A. The audio recording captured in the hotel lounge before the memorial service had begun. We listened to Rachel's voice instruct a paid surrogate to capture the moment I lost control. No narration, only her words. Exhibit B. The devices collected at the memorial under written consent forms. Serial numbers matched the forms. One phone contained a drafted caption, proof she cracked. Another held a message thread with timestamps aligned to the hotel audio. Hayes did not perform for the room. She walked the judge methodically through metadata, line by line. Timestamps, tags, file versions, the small fingerprints people forget they leave. Exhibit C. The viral clip of me discarding a medal into a bin, followed by the original source footage from the cataloging day and the charity cleanup. A forensic analyst took the stand and explained compression artifacts and spectral anomalies. He demonstrated how my supposed statement had been assembled from unrelated words lifted from older interviews. The room remained quiet except for his steady voice and the hum of the projector. Exhibit D. Museum receipts and custody logs from the Army Heritage and Education Center, establishing that my father's medals had been in secure storage before the smear appeared. The registrar testified that the Purple Heart had not left the vault in months. Facts deprive lies of oxygen. The atmosphere in the courtroom thinned as she spoke. Finally, Exhibit E, the money. Hayes displayed transfers from Rachel's account into a shell corporation, then outbound payments to a private investigation firm that shared a suite with the Arlington law practice. Mercer's consultancy had received 3 payments labeled as strategy packages. The amounts are modest, but the regularity and phrasing were too deliberate to be innocent. The judge leaned forward and asked precise questions. Dates, intermediaries, who pressed record and when. Hayes answered each without embellishment. When the court finished with the analyst and the registrar, the judge turned to Rachel's counsel. Objections were raised, then abandoned for lack of substance. The record had already resolved most of the argument. We paused while the clerk reorganized exhibits. Papers rustled. The fluorescent lights hummed. That was when I felt a light touch at my sleeve. Rachel had leaned toward the rail, just far enough for only me to hear. "I only wanted Dad to look at me the way he looked at you," she whispered. Just once. I did not respond. My throat constricted, not with anger, but with a grief that had arrived too late to alter anything. A lifetime of comparisons had become a machine, and it had worn us both down. I remembered the maple tree behind our childhood home, the day he told us that strength takes different forms. Rachel with her quick wit and charm, me with my stubborn resolve. He had never meant to separate us. Yet his faith in me had become a wedge that neither of us had ever learned to lift. The judge called us back to order. Hayes closed with a single sentence. The evidence demonstrates a deliberate campaign to fabricate instability and to defame a serving officer while exploiting the resulting confusion for personal advantage. She sat. No pointed finger, no raised voice. In the hallway, journalists waited near the elevators. I passed without comment. Rachel emerged a moment later, her attorney speaking quietly into her ear. Our eyes met for an instant. No triumph in mine and none in hers. Only the weight of a family that had carried its quarrels into public because it could not resolve them at the kitchen table. The hearing ended without a ruling. The judge took the matter under advisement and set preservation and restraint orders for the afternoon. I sat on a wooden bench and placed my hand over my chest where the Purple Heart would rest if I were my father. Honor is not a medal. It is a posture. I held it. 2 days after the hearing, the Veterans Hall filled with conversation and the scraping of chairs. Flags lined the walls. A bronze plaque bearing my father's name waited beneath a velvet cover. I signed the program at the podium. My notes were brief. The evidence would carry its own weight. Mark kept to the back with 2 plainclothes security observers. The museum registrar occupied the front row, and a retired judge settled beside her with pen ready. I stepped to the microphone and allowed the room to quiet on its own. I spoke first about service. I said, "A name is stitched to a uniform, but honor is stitched to a life." Then I invited the registrar to confirm custody of my father's medals. She described the vault, the logs, and the handling protocols. When she finished, I nodded to the AV technician. The screen lit with the hotel lounge still image. I kept my voice minimal. This is a recording made before the memorial service. The audio played. Rachel's voice carried clearly through the room. Get the moment. I want the second she loses control. A few people shifted in their seats. One audience member stood and walked out with hands tied at his sides. I let the silence breathe and offered no commentary. The next slide displayed 2 frames side by side. My hands over a storage box on the left, a dented lamp descending into a trash can on the right. The analyst spoke calmly. He highlighted the mismatched metadata. He showed the compression seams around the metal. He played the spectrogram, revealing spliced words. When the side-by-side clip ran, the fabrication became visible without the need for adjectives. Whispers gathered like wind moving through trees. A pair of veterans rose and left with heads bowed. Others leaned forward, reading the QR codes in the program. The notarized files loaded on their phones, and their expressions shifted as the evidence presented itself. I kept my shoulders square. My father taught me to allow facts to do the climbing. I spoke again, not to accuse, but to draw a boundary around what mattered. I said my father's Purple Heart was not a prop. It had been wounded into existence. It would never be wielded as a cudgel. I thanked the registrar and the analyst, then turned to the plaque and lifted the velvet cover. The metal caught the gymnasium lights. My father's name glowed. A man in a Korean war cap called out, "General, why not sue them tonight?" I answered plainly, "The court is already in motion. Tonight is not for victory laps. It is for setting the record straight." A woman near the aisle argued that family matters should remain private. I agreed, then said, privacy was violated the moment a camera was aimed at manufacturing shame. Near the back, Dana stood with steady eyes. She did not wave. She did not need to. I closed with one sentence. Honor is quiet until you force it to speak. And it speaks like this. The room held still. Some faces were stern, some had softened. A few remained skeptical. That is the price of daylight. It cannot choose who squints. When it was over, I stepped down from the stage and placed my palm against the plaque. I felt more grounded than I had in weeks. I heard footsteps on the floor behind me, not rushing, simply measured. I did not turn. Whether they were departing in protest or approaching with apologies did not change the fact that the evidence was public, preserved, and anchored to my father's name. The justice was not loud, but it was precise, and it was sufficient. After the ceremony, I remained in the quiet hall, gathering programs from the seats. My phone buzzed. Dana texted. Maybe she understood. Just too late. I asked what she meant. She replied that Rachel was sitting in her car behind the building, silent. Dana asked if I would meet her outside. In the lot, the air smelled of cold metal and pine. She stepped from her sedan, carrying a small craft envelope, and extended it toward me. She gave me this, Dana said. She told me to bring it to you if you still wanted the truth more than a victory. Inside was a flash drive and a folded note. The ink had softened in places as though touched by water. The handwriting was hers. I read it beneath the sodium lights. I hired them. Mercer convinced me that shame could level an uneven field. I was wrong. I will tell the court I was wrong. Use this. Do not protect me. Behind the note was a construction paper crown, purple, the kind Lily assembles at the dining table. Across the band, a child had written one word, brave. I closed my eyes. Brave is not the same as blameless. Sometimes it is merely the first step into a storm you have made yourself. I thanked Dana and asked her to text me when she reached home. I called Ms. Hayes and drove directly to her office. She photographed the envelope, documented the chain of custody, and sealed the drive. A technician cloned it while we waited. The files contained emails and invoices, Mercer's coaching with subject lines, reading narrative package, and pressure points. Bank records linking the shell company to the Arlington firm, payment schedules aligned precisely to the smear timeline, and a memo labeling the viral clip as Phase 2. I did not weep. I felt something steadier. Relief for Lily, and for the part of Rachel that still understood the difference between power and repair. I wrote a short reply. I will inform the judge that you cooperated. I will not tell Lily that you were a villain. I will let the record reflect what you chose today. I did not send it. I placed it in the binder behind my father's yellow card. Driving home, the boulevard maples cast long bars of shadow across the road. I thought of our backyard and the scrape of Rachel's chair the day she walked away from the table. Perhaps tonight she had moved it an inch. An inch is not absolution. It is a beginning. Beginnings matter. They do not erase harm. They change direction. My phone buzzed at a red light. Dana wrote, "She is home with Lily. They are making crowns." I typed back, "Tell her the museum will keep the medals safe. Tell her Lily can come visit them." I erased the message and set the phone face down. Some words belong in a courtroom. Some words belong in the very quiet space between sisters who are not yet ready to speak, but might one day be willing to begin. The ruling arrived on a gray Monday, the kind of morning that carries neither celebration nor dread, only the firm weight of consequence. I sat at the petitioner's table with Ms. Hayes while the clerk sorted papers and the judge adjusted his glasses. Rachel was across the aisle with her counsel. Mercer occupied a seat 2 rows back. A representative from the Arlington firm sat at the end of the row with a blank expression. The judge spoke without drama. He adopted our exhibits in full. He accepted the chain of custody. He credited the museum logs. He found the authentication unimpeached. He described the memorial intervention as proportionate and orderly, undertaken to prevent the manipulation of grief for unlawful purposes. Then he addressed the video. Our analyst returned to the stand and walked through the splice once more, explaining spectral anomalies and compression artifacts, tracing mismatched timestamps and file hashes. The judge expressed the conclusion in a single sentence. The clip was manufactured to convey a false impression of contempt. The order followed in plain language. A permanent injunction prohibited further publication of the fabricated clip. A written retraction would be issued under the signatures of the individuals and entities that had distributed it. Monetary damages were awarded, though the amount mattered less than the language that framed them. The court recognized a coordinated campaign to manufacture instability and to weaponize grief. It recognized that the memorial had been targeted as a stage for humiliation. It recognized that my father's medals had been misrepresented as props in a narrative designed to harm a serving officer and a family. Then the gavel fell on referrals. The judge transmitted the record to the State Bar for review of the firm's conduct. He forwarded Mercer's invoices and correspondence to the Inspector General for potential fraud and misuse of investigative resources. The court recommended that the district attorney consider charges related to unlawful surveillance and wire fraud. He granted our motion to seal my personnel records. He restored my standing in full and commended the museum for its careful stewardship of the artifacts. The courtroom exhaled the way a crowded room does when a storm finally spends itself. I did not feel triumph. I felt repair, tight stitches across a tear that never should have been made. When we stepped into the hallway, journalists clustered near the elevator bank, pens raised, cameras lowered. I offered one statement. The fact had been tested. The record stands. I will return to my duties. I did not mention Rachel by name. I did not need to. Outside, the sky broke slightly. A pale band of light edged the clouds. Mark joined me on the courthouse steps and handed me a certified copy of the order. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said what mattered most. Your father would have approved of the method, not the noise, the method. I folded the order and placed it in the binder alongside the yellow card I carry for steadiness. Ms. Hayes exited with a measured nod. Her work had been clean and careful, the kind that leaves little for rumor to cling to. Behind us, Rachel emerged with her attorney. She did not approach. She placed one hand on the rail, looked toward the street, and left without turning her head. Dana texted that evening. Lily was at the kitchen table with paper crowns. Rachel was quiet. By week's end, the museum accepted the court's written findings for their archive. The Veterans Hall added a brief notation to the display, artifacts preserved by family and community custodians. My father's name sat above the line. I touched the engraved letters and felt the steadiness of metal beneath my fingertips. I had reclaimed the estate as the will had intended. More importantly, I had reclaimed the plain truth of who I am, independent of hashtags and edited frames. That night, I walked the perimeter of the yard the way I do when I need to settle my body into calm. The wind carried a scent. The neighbor's porch light painted the grass in soft gold. I was not celebrating. I was breathing. Repair is quiet. It asks for patience. It holds. I held it. The envelope arrived 2 days later, thin and unremarkable, sliding through the mail slot alongside the circulars. I carried it to the kitchen, opened it with a spoon, and found a single photograph of my father and me on a parade ground. My hand is raised in salute. His smile is restrained and proud. Taped to the back was a strip of printer paper with block letters. You won this round, but you are never truly alone. I stood very still. Threats do not always snarl. Sometimes they whisper through something you love. I slipped the photograph into a clear sleeve and called Mark. He arrived with a field kit, gloves, bags, labels, and an ultraviolet wand. We documented the envelope, sealed it, and logged the time. Then I contacted the detective assigned to the surveillance case. She arrived with a patrol officer, took custody, and asked the right questions. Recent observers, camera alerts, unexplained deliveries. I answered evenly. Ordinary details matter when someone intends to paint dread over your days. After they left, the street looked harmless. Children on scooters, a dog at a fence, a delivery truck rattling by, all ordinary as a disguise. That night, we rotated codes, audited access logs, and changed the layered passwords that controlled the alarm and cameras. Mark walked the perimeter with a flashlight, checking the gate and the oak where a lens can miss a sliver of sidewalk. I brewed coffee and assembled a checklist. Notify the museum, brief Ms. Hayes, alert the Army liaison who monitors threats against senior officers. I was not afraid. I was awake. Fear is a spike. Vigilance is a posture you can sustain. In the morning, the detective called. No usable prints, common paper, and ink. She recommended a sweep for tracking devices and a temporary patrol pass. 2 technicians scanned for transmitters and anomalous signals. Nothing new. Relief and confirmation arrived simultaneously. The sender had preferred suggestion over intrusion. I recognized the tactic. Influence operations frequently conclude with a nudge designed to make the target police herself. I set the nudge aside like a tool I refused to handle. That afternoon, I drove to the Veterans Hall and stood before the plaque. I traced the line holding my father's name and considered what the sender wanted. They wanted hesitation. They wanted me to withdraw from the work of repair and let suspicion accomplish what slander had not. Instead, I sent the detective a brief update. Proceeding with public appearances, routine unchanged, aside from common sense precautions. The power of a threat is the behavior it purchases. I would not pay. On the way home, a dark sedan followed me for 3 lights, then turned away. I noted the plate, partial, no match in memory. I steadied my breathing, let the mirrors return to ordinary, and continued driving. I set the photograph on my desk and framed it with 2 paper crowns Lily had left during a visit. The message read, "You are never truly alone." I translated it this way: you stand in the company you keep. My father keeps me company. So does the record we have built. So does the quiet discipline that declines to be steered by shadows. I opened my notebook and drafted a brief statement to file if the sender stepped into the light. Precise facts, dates, chain of custody, nothing a rumor could consume. The envelope had aimed at my pulse. It missed. My pulse belongs to the work ahead, to the repairs already accomplished, and to the understanding that vigilance can be steady without surrendering to fear. I keep my father's purple heart where the light finds it in the late afternoon. When the sun moves across the desk, the metal catches a pale gleam that shifts like breath. I do not touch it often. I do not need to. It is not a talisman. It is a sentence I repeat until it becomes part of me. Honor is a choice you keep choosing. The court spoke. The museum preserved. The Veterans Hall hung his name in bronze. Those are structures, necessary and strong. But the work of keeping faith belongs to the living, to the quiet of the kitchen at dawn, to the decision not to answer provocation in kind, to the promise you honor when no one would blame you for releasing it. I think about Rachel at the table with Lily and the paper crowns. I think about Dana crossing a parking lot carrying an envelope that changed the course of a year. I do not fashion saints from harm. I do not pretend the damage was minor. I measure it honestly, then choose not to build a second injury out of bitterness. My father once said, "Courage is not a roar. It is a steady step across a room where you're needed." I take that step by writing down what happened, with dates and sources and the lines that hold a story true. I take it by standing before the plaque and allowing silence to count as speech. If the sender of the envelope believes I will live as a hunted thing, they have misread me. I will live as a keeper of records, of promises, of the boundary between justice and revenge. Revenge is a sharp instrument. It satisfies little and breaks in your hand. Justice is slower. It holds. I can wait for it because I know precisely what I am waiting for. Tomorrow, I will drive to the museum and sign custody of a scanned photograph showing my father in profile, eyes directed forward. In the evening, I will prepare something simple and set an extra plate on the counter. It is my way of keeping him close. Grief persists. So does gratitude. So does work. The metal rests in its case. The light crosses. My breath returns to an even count. This is how I honor the promise he placed in my 10-year-old hand, to guard what deserves guarding and to walk forward with a steady heart. The cemetery rests on a low hill where the wind carries the fragrance of pine and freshly cut grass. I park beneath the old elm and walk the path I have walked since childhood, when my father would bring flowers for men he had served alongside. The new granite is still pale. The letters of his name are sharp, as though the stone is still learning to hold them. I drew a small purple heart lapel pin from a felt pouch. The original metal remains in the museum vault. This small pin is my stand-in. I rested it at the base of the headstone and laid my palm against the granite. The stone was cool. My breath steamed in the morning air. I lowered my head and spoke as if the wind itself were carrying the words. I kept my voice steady. The words were simple. I whispered. I kept it. The sentence held many meanings. I kept the metal safe. I kept our name clean. I kept faith with the training that taught me not to fight in anger. I kept the promise you placed in my hand when I was 10, when you said courage is a choice you repeat. I stood that way for a full minute until the wind thinned and the sun broke through the clouds. A groundskeeper passed with a rake and nodded without intruding. Two older veterans paused at a nearby plot. One raised two fingers in a quiet salute. I returned the gesture and remained where I was. Noises moved through our family like weather. Today I wanted the opposite. Quiet that arrives and stays because someone invited it to remain. I told my father about the hearing, about the registrar from the museum who had protected the chain of custody with the dedication of a priest guarding the chalice, about the judge who allowed facts to do the speaking, about the veterans who watched the side-by-side comparisons and saw plainly where the falsehood had been stitched. I told him I felt relief rather than triumph, repair rather than victory, and that repair suits me better than celebration ever could. I also told him about Lily, about the paper crown she fashioned with silver stars, about the way children repeat what they are given, about how I pledged never to allow her to be used as an instrument. I told him that Rachel had sent an envelope that helped the court find the truth. I did not conceal the harm she caused. I did not embellish it either. I placed it beside the repair the way you set bandages next to scars. A small bouquet leaned against the headstone, gladioli, and rosemary. I tucked the felt pouch beneath the flowers and straightened the flag in its metal holder. The breeze lifted the edge and let it fall again, a small, faithful rhythm. I breathed with it. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The practice I use when a room needs my steadiness more than my voice. When I stepped back, I noticed my boots had left dark ovals in the dew that would fade within the hour. The imprint comforted me. It meant I had been present, that I had taken responsibility for being present, that grief and duty can share the same ground without conflict. I traced the letters of his name with my fingertip, not enough to polish them, just enough to feel the groove. On the way to the car, the groundskeeper called after me. "Ma'am, the pin will be safe here. We keep watch over things." I thanked him and told him where the real metal lives, how the vault will outlast all of us, and how the story matters more than the object itself. He smiled and said that stories are why people visit. Metal only gives their hand a place to rest. I understood. I looked once more at the headstone before pulling away. The hill maintained its simple geometry, rows of names, shared silence, and a flag above them all. My father had taught me that honor is not noise. It is posture. The posture I carry today is steadiness. The words I take with me are still the same. I kept it. I did not drive straight home from the cemetery. I took the longer route through the neighborhood where we grew up, past the maple that once shaded our backyard. The house belongs to another family now. I slowed and let the scene stand. Some version of us once stood here. Forgiveness is too substantial a word to lift in a single day. I am not yet ready to forgive Rachel. That is not cruelty. It is accuracy. Still, I am finished carrying the heat that tried to consume my sleep. I will not let anger be the architect of my days. Justice is moved. The orders are written. The museum holds the records. I can release the reflex to justify myself in every room. At home, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table. I wrote 2 columns, damage and repair. Under damage, I listed the smear, the hotel payment, the fabricated clip, the way Lily had been used as a carrier of a lie. Under repair, I listed the injunction, the retraction, the archive, the quiet truth that now stands on its own. The columns did not balance. They rarely do. But the second column had substance. It will continue to grow if I tend to it. I placed the page at the back of the binder and moved the binder to a shelf. I am not setting aside vigilance. I am refusing to worship it. There is a boundary between readiness and obsession. Soldiers learn early. I thought of Rachel in her kitchen with Lily and the crowns. I can picture her hands cutting ribbon, her face tired. I'm not responsible for her healing. I am responsible for my boundary. I will answer the court when it calls. I will answer Lily when she asks about her grandfather. I will not answer rumors. After tea, I walked the yard and checked the gate. The air smelled of rain, though the sky remained clear. That scent reminds me that the weather inside a person can differ from what the sky shows. I said a quiet prayer for the part of Rachel that brought the envelope, for the part that still believed truth could be chosen. I did not grant absolution. I granted room. Room is where growth happens. I called my therapist and extended our standing appointment. Leadership does not set aside care once the crisis passes. Leadership widens the path. We spoke about allowing justice to be what it is, not vengeance dressed in formal language, but a structure that permits ordinary life to resume. Sometimes the most radical sentence is simply, "I'm going to sleep." That night, I left the porch light on and read a chapter from a book my father had loved. The words were steady. They made a shelter. I set the book down and wrote a letter I may never send. I told Rachel I would not oppose leniency if she continued to cooperate, that accountability and mercy can share the same bench when the facts are honored, that Lily deserves parents who choose repair both publicly and privately. I sealed the letter and placed it alongside the yellow card. Before bed, I stood at the window and watched the street. A neighbor carried groceries. A boy wheeled a bin to the curb. A dog chased a moth. Ordinary life does not ask for a speech. It asks for presence. I turned off the light and let the house rest. Justice will keep its own watch. My task is to release the rope I have been holding and trust that not everything requires my hands at all times. I slept, not perfectly, but honestly. The following evening, A dark sedan paused at the curb outside our house. It idled beneath the streetlight while the sound of the engine settled in my chest. Mark stepped onto the porch and met my eyes. I shook my head and stayed where I was. The car crept forward, reversed once, then moved away as if the driver had wanted the pause noted rather than feared. I did not follow. I set my hands on the rail and counted my breath. Vigilance is not panic. It is measured attention. The cameras captured the plate and the time. We forwarded the clip to the detective and locked the door. Inside, the house felt like itself again. Light on the table, a book lying open, a mug drying beside the sink. The message was simple. Someone is watching. My reply was simpler. So am I. And I am not alone. Before I close this story, I want to speak directly to you who have been listening. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read each one with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not merely to hear more stories like this, but to become part of a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Wherever you are, we hope you carry something from this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock at your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story. The darkness stays where it has always stayed, in the spaces between houses and trees. Darkness always exists,